That's me.
I have every right to call the police.
We got a police call for you.
I was sleeping in the common room.
Graduate student Lolani Siambola took to social media Monday night after a fellow student called the police after seeing her sleeping in the building's common area.
I live here and you're blocking the door.
What unit?
I don't need to tell you that. What unit do you live in?
Where does it say that I have to show an ID?
Yasmin Abulaman recorded this now viral video on the 4th of July. Bloom, a volunteer at this Winston-Salem neighborhood pool, had asked to see her ID and called police.
Got these little kids scared. This lady's following us.
A babysitting job taking an unexpected turn for Corey Lewis.
She calling police on an 8-year-old little girl. You can hide all you want. The whole world gonna see you, boo.
Allison Edel threatening to call the police on an 8-year-old girl for illegally selling water.
I'm not gonna let them kill me out here like they want to. I'm not about to be the next Trayvon Martin.
Do not touch me. Do not touch me.
What the heck? I am. What the? Why are you doing that?
He was part of the family barbecue here a year ago when a woman called police on 2 black men using a charcoal grill. Video of the woman went viral.
Police responded to the Starbucks after an employee called 911.
It hurt.
DeLuca's mother, Clintina Roll, is still heartbroken, talking about the pain as a parent seeing the video that has been viewed thousands of times.
What am I doing wrong? What did I do wrong?
She's been following me around the store the whole time. There she goes. She thinks I'm stealing.
Racial profiling in Alabama. Watch this. You think I'm stealing? This is hilarious.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to make sure that you can hear me, and we are about to begin. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are streaming live right now from Florida Memorial University, and we want to welcome you for joining us here on the live stream on the NBC6 app or on NBC6.com for this very special town hall, Breathing While Black, sponsored by NBC6, Cox Radio, as well as Florida Memorial University and NABJ. Thank you so much for joining us for this very important discussion here, and thank our audience out there for joining us this evening as well. Give yourselves a warm round of applause. Now, to the left of me, to the right of you, I have joining us here on the stage, Dyma Loving and Justin Moore. Dyma, she is a mother of 3 who made national headlines after video of her arrest went viral back in March. Many of you saw it there on the video. She was handcuffed in an aggressive arrest after she called police for help when a neighbor pointed a gun at her and her friend. Dyma is joined here by civil rights attorney Justin Moore. He's an advocate for social justice in America. You can applaud. Next we have Philip Agnew. You may recognize Philip. He's the co-founder of Dream Defenders, and he is currently working on the Bernie Sanders presidential campaign. Next we have Deputy Jeff Bell. Deputy Bell is the president of the Broward Sheriff's Office Deputies Association. He's been the union president for 4 years now, and he's a 23-year veteran at BSO, and he's worked in law enforcement for 25 years. Next, we have a friend of mine, Captain Delrish Moss over there. He is currently with the Florida International University Police Department. Now, prior to that, he served as police chief there at Ferguson Police Department in Ferguson, Missouri. I know many of you are familiar with Ferguson, Missouri. He did that 2 years after the 2014 shooting death of Michael Brown. He was the first permanent African-American police chief in Ferguson. He's a familiar face here in South Florida. Captain Moss worked with the City of Miami Police Department for 3 decades. Give him a warm round of applause. Next we gotta say the best for last right there. Rodney Jacobs Jr., ladies and gentlemen. He's the assistant director of the Miami Civilian Investigative Panel. Has a very important position. The department investigates abusive police practices and oversees investigations and policing initiatives. Give him a warm round of applause. And most importantly, I have to thank all the crew here with NBC6 because this would not be done without them. And most importantly, my lovely colleague, she is down. I always catch you too, doing something down there. And I catch her down there. Please welcome Trina Robinson, as well as select audience members, the president of Miami-Dade NAACP, Reuben Roberts, activist, community organizer, and CEO of the Smile Trust, Valencia Gunder, former gang leader turned street minister, Rene Martinez, and student activist and MSD shooting survivor, Mei-Ling Ho-Shing. All right. Again, thank you guys so much for joining us. We're going to begin with our first question. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Of course, you're like, Jawan, really the first question? But, you know, breathing while black is such an important issue. First off, how are you doing now since our last conversation?
I'm alive.
You're alive?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you look at that video, is it still hard for you to watch?
Yeah, definitely. It just brings back all the emotions and stuff that I went through, and you know.
How did you feel in the moment when that was going on?
In the moment, I was just fearful for my life. I just wanted to make it home to my kids. That's all I could think about, was getting home to my kids. I just love them. I just want my kids. Like, I don't know what else there is.
Do you believe it would have been different if you were not a black woman?
Absolutely, 100%. It would have been, they would have been, you know, arresting the guy, mobbing in his house and trying to find the gun if I was, you know, a different color skin. For sure, 100%.
So Justin, I come to you now. How do you assert your rights as a citizen if you feel that something like this may happen to you or goes wrong?
You know, that's an extremely tenuous question that deserves a response that you have to really think deeply about what asserting your rights looks like in this country. Because we've seen folks who try to assert their rights and they get treated like Daima, or they ultimately can get murdered. So asserting your rights is a very dangerous proposition in this country. So when I speak to young adults, I tell them, look, you do have rights, but probably the best right that you can assert is your right to be quiet. And it's a shame that you got to be docile in the face of law enforcement. But I think it's come to this point in this country where if you want to survive and live to fight another day so you can call somebody like me, you might just have to just be quiet and not even choose or elect to assert your right as a human being. That's where we're at. And I think, it comes from this long legacy of blacks in America and people of color not having personhood, right? It starts with the 3/5 compromise, which is what basically the bedrock of this country. When you had the southern states wanting to elect to have slaves to be counted in their states, and the northern states saying like, well, hey, we can't use those numbers because it's going to give you guys more power than us. So we're going to turn those slaves into 3/5 of a person. It comes from that. And, you know, and I think that legacy is alive and well with how police us. We don't have the ability to say, look, I have privacy rights, you can't search my car, or hey, you know, I called the police, you need to be responding to my calls. We don't have those rights. And I think she's a great example of that, unfortunately. So when I talk to these kids, when I talk to folks, and you know, whether it be in Texas or here, I say just please just assess the situation, and if you feel like you know, the officer isn't de-escalating the way he needs to, you try to de-escalate it yourself, and you know, I think the best way of doing that is just being quiet.
Do you believe that breathing while black is a growing issue in this country based on the climate we're living in?
Oh, it's been an issue. It's been an issue. It's been an issue since the founding of this country. I mean, we're a nation of precedent. So I think epoch after epoch, generation after generation, era after era has endeavored to tell us that just being black is a crime. And breathing while black compounds the crime, so to speak. It's almost an aggravating factor. It's, you know, you have like assault, then you have aggravated assault, and you have like a deadly weapon.
Right.
Breathing, I guess, is the deadly weapon for black people. So it gets compounded. But.
So Philip, you've spoken on this issue a number of occasions. Matter of fact, I had you on Voices talking about driving while black.
Yep.
and you spoke about breathing while black. How do we overcome this?
Well, I think Justin laid out a really compelling case here. We've got to look at the history of policing in this country and what I like to call earned animosity. And so black communities have an earned animosity. It is not something that comes out of the blue. We're subjected to a level of scrutiny and policing. Where other people have safety, we have policing, right? And so we're subjected to a level of animus, of brutality on a daily basis. And so we've got to accept and acknowledge that that is the current state of affairs for black people in this country, for Latino people in this country, for poor people. There's places you go where poor white people is getting treated like trash. Latino people are getting treated like trash. And so how do we remedy this? I think, and we have an example of this on the panel, I think, you know, black people, poor people in this country want safety. We deserve safety, right? We want to be able to go home. We want to all be able to go home to our children. We want to raise families, et cetera. And so in order to have that, we need real control over our police departments. Right now, police departments fight tooth and nail, whether it's through the Police Officers' Bill of Rights, whether it's through the blue wall, the blue line, to ensure that the communities that they are supposed to police, protect, and serve do not have control over them, do not have subpoena power, do not have observance of their budget, cannot check them. And in what other industry in our country do we have absolutely zero oversight over the behavior of that entire entity, a state entity? I can't name really one. If we had doctors that every day were losing people on the table, or we had lawyers that couldn't seem, well, we do, but we have lawyers. Don't go there. I'm going to end the analogy on the doctors. But if we had doctors every single day, there would be an uproar, right? They would be disbarred. But we can't seem as a society to check our police departments or give the communities the control to do what they need to do when they're funded fully by our taxpayer money. Right? When the dollars that they use militaristically to put us in jail, to put us in prison, are our dollars. And then when we do get to sue them, and then when we do potentially win, which is a small percentage of the time, I know more when this brother's working for it, then that money doesn't come out of the police department budget. It comes straight out of our money again. And so it's a double whammy every single time. And so we've got to look at how police departments, the history of them, what they're doing now, we've got to give communities true control over what safety looks like in their community.
Right, Philip. And before we go to our next panelist, we would like to check in now with Trina Robinson with our first question here from our selected audience member.
Jawan, thank you so much. Hopefully my mic is hot. At this time, we're going to have someone who really has been a champion in this community to come forward. Her name is Valencia Gunder. She's an activist and a community organizer and CEO of the Smile Trust. And she is a firebrand and takes serious the things that are happening in our community. Valencia.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Thank y'all for having me. I'm V. And so I was branded as the modern day Fannie Lou. And she always said that she was sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? And I'm getting tired of us like being on this hamster wheel, right? The tensions between community and police is getting worse. We're starting to see more police-involved shootings. The safety within our communities are not being prevented. And as we come together while talking about breathing while black, I want to know, like, even from the activists to law enforcement or oversight, like, what is going to be some of you all's real solutions to change this? Because right now, I don't feel safe within my community. I definitely don't feel safe when I leave it. So therefore, I just want to know about some innovative ways we can truly make safe communities.
One of our law enforcement officials, would you like to take that question?
I think can you hear me?
Yes.
I think one of the things that, that's been a theme throughout this conversation is that you don't have control over your police department. And, I hate to be a contrarian, but you do. You have control over your police department because we work for you. And I think one of the things that we have to do is we have to remember that. But one of the things that also has to happen is that you have to use the mechanisms in place And where those mechanisms aren't working for you, you use the power that you have as citizens in a democratic society to change those things. You know, Ferguson is a prime example of a police department that had long been out of touch with its community. And Ferguson didn't change, you know, unfortunately, until there was unrest in Ferguson. Now, I'm not advocating unrest, but one of the things that came out of that was Ferguson also realized amongst that power to actually get the attention of the citizenry and of the elected officials, they realized what their power was. And so you go to a Ferguson meeting right now, and those Ferguson meetings are filled with citizens who have taken control of the direction of their government. You have citizens who are involved in policy making on police departments. You have citizens who are involved in even the hiring process of police departments, but that's because they got actively involved. Now, one of the things that happens, unfortunately, oftentimes is that we don't really get involved. Well, you know, and there are a lot of reasons for that. You know, we're working, we're trying to make a living, we're doing all these other things, but we don't get involved often until we're angered by something, and then that's not sustained. And that is always going to be a problem for us because, you know, in policing there's protect and serve. Service is as much a part of this whole process as anything. And, you know, Ferguson was a prime example of a citizenry coming together and saying, you know what, we're fed up with this, we want change. And they made it happen.
Can I say something
Absolutely.
that potentially wouldn't be expected from me? I actually think police departments get charged with cleaning up the problem that our economic system creates, right? And so our economic system takes jobs and opportunities out of black people, out of black communities, out of poor communities. You stack poor people on top of each other every single day of their life. There's no medical care, there's no opportunity to get out. And so there's a combustible environment, not because black people or poor people are born violent, but because we are living in an economic system that creates and breeds this type of activity in any community, right? No matter the color, if you're poor, you don't got nowhere to go, you don't know what you're gonna eat, you don't know what's gonna be on your table, there's nothing for you to do, there's no job program, there's no place for you to play video games, no place for you to play basketball, there's no place for you to learn, do art. What are you going to do? And so then we're put in a position where we have to fight the only face of that, what we perceive as evil that comes in our community, and that's the police department. And I'm not letting police off the hook. We had a great conversation earlier. I'm not letting police off the hook. That's just not what I do. But what I am saying is they are the most visible face of what is an invisible to us evil, right? And it's not because I'm working on a campaign. It is an economic system that creates haves and have-nots. And the only way you have haves is if you have millions of have-nots. And what are you going to do? You're going to be put into a war zone, and you're going to fight the very people who are there brutalizing you and watching TV every day and seeing that you evil and seeing that you got a gun and everything. And so I think we cannot let another party off of the hook of which we view police as representing, and they are in a lot of ways.
Deputy Bell.
I'll add on that, and I've had this firm belief for a long time, to make systematic change within the police departments. You say before, what is the root of the problem? And I've been an honest believer of this for a long time, is that the problem is part of our hiring process and education when we put police officers through academies. It is the only job in the world that I know of, or at least in the United States, where we spend taxpayer money for 6 months of training for a police officer to go through an academy. And on the very last day when they graduate, the teachers tell them, forget everything we just taught you because it doesn't matter. Yep. We spend far too much time learning about tort reform law from the 1600s and Quaker laws when we don't teach people when they graduate the academy on the very first day what a traffic ticket looks like, what an evidence form looks like, how to interact with people. And I believe, and I've had this belief since day one when I started out in the Corrections Academy, I think every police officer in the larger police departments that have the corrections oversight, that every police officer should learn on the job first within the corrections department and then transfer out onto the road, because that's where you develop your interpersonal skills. When you enter into a jail block, it's you and yourself and no weapons. So you have to learn to compromise with people, associate with people, communicate with people, and reason with people. And the second part of getting to the root of this problem is you must eliminate the politics out of law enforcement. Because The police officers, the average police officer, we know when we go to calls that we're going to be viewed as the bad guy responding to a call that we already perceive as that one neighborhood person calling in these constant complaints. And we know that we have to go. Now, when we make contact with somebody, we know we're going to agitate them already because, oh my God, what did I do? I didn't do anything. Well, you know what? We get in trouble if we don't go to the call. So we're the ones that are put in the middle between the politics and the policies and the lack of education that we put in forth with these officers. I can tell you this right now. 25 years I've been on road patrol with 2 different departments. I've never once been mandated to go to a legal update class.
Wow. Yeah.
And so
Rodney.
On this panel, obviously, we have the unicorn police officer because I deal with police officers every single day. And although all of that stuff sounds great and there are very innovative approaches to V's point earlier, right now we live in a system that doesn't value those same standards. We have police unions that are in bed in some ways with politicians and state attorneys, and they do things that is somehow beyond the pale. However, I will say that although police or black individuals, people of color, are disproportionately affected, thereby allowing a more bigger scale or a bigger megaphone to these issues, I would argue that police misconduct is an American issue affecting communities throughout the United States. Yep. But until these individuals are held accountable, and that's what our office seeks to do on a day-to-day basis, nothing will change. And when you have police unions that wield that power and their influence and their money and their resources uniformly against these mechanisms, it makes it even harder to change.
Let me comment on that, because it's very important when you say police unions. I started the local chapter for the Broward Sheriff's Office Deputies Association.
Right.
And I knew that there needed to be change. And I made it so that when we chartered our own local, never will a single dollar from our police union ever go to a politician at any level on that. We knew that there had to be reform so dinosaurs don't stay in a command position a long time. We are the first union in South Florida that every 4 years we mandate that every member gets to vote on who their president is, so there's constant change. And when it comes time to political endorsements, I personally don't care about the politicians in Broward County. I allow the members to electronically vote, and whoever gets the most amount of votes, that's who gets the endorsement. So we're never going to be in bed with somebody, and we're changing that atmosphere.
Okay, well, we're going to get to you on some more questions as well, so we're going to talk to you. Justin, you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, surely.
Yeah.
So I think what everybody's talking about, I think those are great approaches to changing policing, but what I'm not hearing is proffering innovative changes to policing. And one of the, what I mean by that is, we're
going to have somebody help you out. Go ahead.
Yeah, what I mean by that is, so one of the biggest issues I see with policing as an attorney is that the average beat cop or the traffic cop has the ability to use his discretion the way he wants to. And I think within that space, that's where you start seeing a lot of these use of force issues, because you see cops or officers not using their discretion in an unbiased way. And I think what we really need to look at is finding ways to take the officer out of that position to where he can make a bad decision. Because I think that puts a lot of liability on that officer, and that puts a lot of liability on those cities that are deploying those officers. And one of the issues that I've seen, and this came from the 94 crime bill, I'm not going to call it the Clinton crime bill or the Bernie crime bill or the Biden crime bill. I'm not taking a jab.
It's okay. Or the John Lewis crime.
Or the John Lewis.
There you go.
Maxine Waters crime. But what came out of that, and what it doesn't get a lot of press, because I think we're not actually breaking that crime bill down, but there's this thing called pretext stops.
Yes.
And you can use a traffic stop to further investigate.
Yep.
So what I'm thinking is that, and I've had these conversations with a few other legal scholars and activists and organizers, we need to take that whole thing and flip it on its head. We don't need to give an officer the opportunity to weaponize his discretion. Because a lot of times when he is weaponizing his discretion, or she is, they're weaponizing it against people of color. So, and it's like, I mean, we talk about innovating everything. You have these traffic lights, you have all this other stuff. Now the traffic cameras, or the red light cameras and all this other stuff, why can't we automate other portions of traffic stops? I mean, you see these boxes on the side of the road telling you that you're going too fast. Why can't that be the mechanism with which you get a speeding ticket? And I know a lot of folks are going to be like, well, damn, I can't speed 10 miles over. It's going to be, but we're talking about saving our lives versus having to pay a speeding ticket. We need to take the officer out of that position, because it not only takes the negative liability from the police departments, where you guys are having to go through getting ran through the media. Because I'm gonna go to the media if you mess up a client. You have to, so you probably don't have to pay for PR people, and you don't have to go. The city council folks don't have to figure out what an appropriate settlement is. But we got to start innovating from that standpoint. How do we decrease discretion so people can start living their lives? Also, that's one. And two, and I saw this in Austin, Texas. I'm from Dallas. And it's a group called the Austin Justice Coalition. My brother Chaz Moore, he's not my real brother, but he shared the same last name. What they did was they attacked the collective bargaining negotiations between the police union and the city.
Who's that?
The Austin Justice Coalition and the people at large in Austin. So what they did was they were like, look, you guys aren't going to compromise our humanity. And you start compromising a person's or a group of people's humanity, we start saying, well, we don't want oversight, or we don't need to apply these mechanisms of transparency. They said was no, what we're going to do is we're going to get involved in the collective bargaining negotiations. We're going to have our list of things that you guys need to talk about, that we need included into that contract. And the union, of course, they pushed back. They got to an impasse like all collective bargainings do. If you're a member of a union, you're always going to be hardline at first. But once your union members get to the point to where they can't pay for their bills each week, they're going to be like, well, hey, wait a minute. Maybe we do need to rethink this thing.
Right.
So I think, when you talk about, the citizenry becoming more involved, you can't just say get more involved. You got to say, how do they get more involved? So a lot of these issues are very complex, and we don't know the point of entry that's going to have the most impact. But I do believe affecting police union contracts is probably step one. And we've seen it done in Austin, and they've done it at a high and very effective level.
Right. Well, one of the things I want to get to is when I talk about the citizenry being involved. One of the things what I want to say is there seems to be this current thing that citizenry is helpless in this, and ultimately we work for you. And so no matter what that level of involvement is and where it is, there's smart people in this room. We can figure out ways to get involved. But what I'm saying is, it's through that involvement that you can make change happen. We are not powerless, and that's the point I'm trying to make.
We have a voice, but it seems like every time we have a voice, it's our fault. So how do we get past that? And how do we get past the bureaucracy then and the red tape in order to make change?
Well, again, Ferguson, like I said, Ferguson is an example. Now, of course, I will never advocate taking to the streets and tearing stuff down. I think it's very effective. And I'll tell you why I won't do that. I'll tell you why I won't do that. Because in the 1980s, I lived over town.
Yeah. Right.
And when they took to the streets and burned things down, it was stuff that benefited my community. Yeah. And it was my community that had to go a great distance to stores. It was my community that had to go places because black business had been burned down and shut down. And so, what actually
you could take to the streets without burning it down.
That process, what actually ends up in that process is that we get hurt again, especially if we're economically disadvantaged and we don't have the advantage of choice. So I won't advocate that. But what I am saying is that we do have, Ferguson showed you that if you demand certain things can happen. If you push for certain things, civilian oversight. Civilian oversight came because the citizenry stepped up and said we wanted it. It wasn't because government said they wanted it, because they didn't. They launched a campaign against it to get it here. They launched a campaign to get it in Ferguson. Well, you start to get that oversight because the citizenry stepped up and said we wanted it. In Ferguson, you got a new police chief because the citizenry said we wanted it. Ultimately, those of us who sit in these positions of power, we have people that we have to answer to, and you are those people.
Right. So that would be ideal in circumstances where individuals came to the forefront and said, hey, can we do this? To your point, if we got around the table and said these collective bargaining agreements aren't working, or if we went to our normal politicians and said, hey, city council, city commission, can you do these things that help benefit us as well, the police department? But typically, it only happens and it's only operationalized during catastrophic events. Yes. Civilian oversight happened in the city of Miami, not because a couple people got together and said, hey, this is a great idea and we should do this, you should get behind it. It happened after a catastrophic event. Michael Brown had to die in Ferguson for 55 officers to get in line. So it takes these catastrophic events in order for the nexus to move, and that's not the same as people getting together for a good idea for the betterment of the group.
That's all true, but the point I'm trying to make is we don't have to wait for catastrophic events for these things to happen.
No, but it seems that I understand that, but it sounds like he's saying that it seems like That's the only time it happens, that change happens.
That may be the case, but the one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to continue to perpetuate a narrative that we are helpless. We're not helpless.
No. I think when people, in no way was I trying to put forth the narrative that we are helpless. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I don't think people would be here if they, if we consider ourselves just objects and not subjects in what we do. But I don't want to take off the table for folks, in the spirit of just being respectable, the notion that when people go out into the streets, right, and do what needs to be done and express a genuine human emotion, seeing someone be beaten, someone die, and say that this can't continue to happen, that is an illegitimate way of involving themselves in the democratic process. Everything that the United States government actually teaches us in our history books, which are incomplete, etc., is that when people in Boston were mad, what happened? When they wanted to throw off the chains of the colonizer, what did they do? And I'm not saying that is the only way. I think I wouldn't be here if that was all I did every single day. Somebody would have killed me by now. But the fact is, I think that is a very legitimate part in what black people, what young people have to do in order to get any type of change heard. And I like to use the analogy, if I'm stranded on an island, right? The only way I can scream, I can make signs, I can do whatever, send messages in bottles and do whatever. But the only way that someone's gonna see what's happening is if I light that thing on fire. And I'm sorry, but sometimes that's the only way that people can come around a conversation, and we cannot take that off of the table for us.
But hold on, I'm sorry, Philip, but you have to clear that up. Light that thing on fire, because
it was a poetic analogy. But what I am saying is, of course, people in expression of their anger will reach out and touch the things that are closest to them. Right. So those are the stores in your community. Most crime happens in proximity. So there are things that happen in the midst of what some people would call a riot, I would call an uprising, right? That some people may not make sense to a lot of folks here, people watching. But if every single day there's a small level of, I keep calling it earned animosity, a little smack in the face, a little disrespect, somebody following you in the store, somebody following you home, people asking where you are, why you're not supposed to be here, those things compound and add up. And so this is not just a spontaneous combustion. This is years and years of letting it simmer, right, putting your head down, excuse me, boss, my bad, you didn't see me. And this is the type of thing that erupts. And yes, you know what, I think it is easier. I have empathy. I think it is easier for a police officer to say, look, I want to go home to my kids. I just came here to do my job. But unless you realize the context that we're all operating in, that we are all locked in a struggle, right? That you don't never have to go over to Belle Isle or Fisher Island and experience what we experience every single day. You got to understand the context that you're operating in. And you know what? Many times we're not mad at you. We mad at every single thing, and you're just an example of that.
All right, before we move on, I know we have another audience member question that I would like to get to as well. Trina?
Yes, sir. Jawan, thank you so much. Hopefully my microphone will come up. Yes, thank you. Right now, Mr. Reuben Roberts, he's with the president of the Miami-Dade NAACP. He has a question for the audience. He's going to come forward now. Reuben.
Thank you, Trina. Thank you, Jawan, for inviting me to ask this question. And Diamond, it's good to see you. I didn't recognize you earlier. And good to see you, and I'm glad that you were able to get home to see your kids. And NAACP, we still stand with you. I think this question is in keeping with what you all were talking about earlier. I have a question I want to ask, and I'd like the two law enforcement officers to answer the question, but I welcome the panelists to answer it as well. Can a police officer effectively police a community that it's afraid of? And I ask this question because time and time again we see in incidents like what happened in Texas, where you can have a mass shooter with a weapon get arrested and apprehended without being killed. Yes. And you have someone selling loose cigarettes, or you have someone that's walking down the street that happen to look like me and not armed, but they made a move or they appeared to have something, and then they're killed. And I say that, and it's important that we understand, what this Breathing While Black means to us. And I want to say to you, Brother Moss, I look forward to the day till I can honestly and earnestly say to my son, the police officers work for you, and not be afraid of him having an interaction with a police officer. So we can say that, we can talk about that, but the reality is, and you know, that we got to have a different talk with our children than other groups have with their children. And so that's the reality that we got to talk about. But answer that question, can a police officer effectively police a community that it's afraid of? And why do we allow people like Dylan Roof to go to Burger King after they did the mass shootings and all of that? What's the difference in that treatment? Thank you.
All right.
I'll start.
Captain Moss,
first of all, let me start with a caveat, because I don't think people notice, but I've been a black man for 53 years now. 54 years. I'm putting my age back. I've only been a cop 35. And so, don't get me wrong. It's not that I don't understand what we're saying here. But what I'm saying is there's kind of a different part of this. There's kind of a different part of this narrative. We're not powerless. Now, as individuals, yes, we are. As individuals, you end up in circumstances where you're not going to win that. You're not going to win that. You're not going to win that battle, but you can win that war. That's why you have young attorneys like this who help you fight your battle. That's why you have the CIP. That's why you have these mechanisms. Now, going back to your question, can you effectively police a community if you're afraid of it? I don't think you can. I don't think you can, because I think when you're afraid, a lot of mistakes happen. A lot of bad things happen. And to be perfectly honest with you, as a police officer, I don't want the guy next to me to be afraid.
But when you are afraid, though, just like you said, incidents happen. But how do you get past that, though?
Well, I think one of the first things I did in Ferguson was I got police officers out there, because I didn't get to pick and choose who was already there. I got to pick and choose who came. But one of the things I did was I got those police officers out there to start meeting those citizens, especially in those parts of Ferguson that they hadn't normally gone to. And was there fear for some of them? Yes, there were. Some of them left the police department. Some of them I invited to leave the police department. But they're not there anymore. But part of breaking down fear is getting to know each other. And one of the things that police officers have to do, one of the things that you have to hold police chiefs accountable for, is making sure that in those downtimes they are getting out to meet people, not just responding to calls when it's an emergency. Because if I respond to a call and I've never been there before, of course there's all sort of fear and anxiety. But if I've been there before and we've started to build a relationship, then there's a lot less fear.
And how important is trust in that?
Trust is very important. Trust is everything.
I think it also starts with the first time somebody fills out an application and submits for an oral interview and you come into the department. It's not just what type of a degree do you have or where did you go to school. It's your self-confidence as you come into a room and you can communicate with people. It's your life experience that you have and the confidence that you can portray out in the communities. Have there been times when I've been scared? Oh, you bet your butt. When you walk in front of a door and you hear a shotgun rack, and you're the only person there, that puts a chill down anybody's spine on that. So there's going to be calls where everybody's scared to go to. But in terms of effectively policing a community, no, it can't be done. And that's why we need to keep certain hiring standards to a high level and weed out the people that are just here for a job. This is a calling, law enforcement. 99% of the police officers out there are good. Are there going to be some bad apples to get through? Absolutely. We're just a reflection of the community itself. So there will be people that get through the cracks, and good, honest police officers don't want to work with bad police officers. We don't, because that puts our lives in jeopardy and it puts a bad name on us.
I would say that as a caveat and dovetail to the situation is that the expectation is not that everyone that gets through the process won't be a bad apple or won't be fearful. It's that when those people are identified, they need to be removed. And it's far too often that does not happen. And so we don't expect this process to be perfect. We understand that in some situations, you're putting an 18-year-old on the street with a gun with discretion, which is just crazy. So in these situations where you have found the bad apple, no police officer ever wants to complete the sentence that one bad apple spoils the bunch. You let it go by the wayside, and that person becomes infested. They stay for 30 or 40 years, become police union presidents, and then they end up doing something catastrophic.
Wow. And I know you're about to say something, Justin, but I have Daima here. Yep. Daima is a victim to many people of what can go wrong. I wanted to ask you, Daima, do you view police officers differently now because of what you went through?
Oh, yes. To be honest, I can't really stand the sight of them. They send chills down my spine. They give me sweaty palms. I don't know what to think. Like, it bothers me. Like, in my eyes, there's no good cop out there. There has to be a lot of fixing going on for me to even think about a police officer.
And you have kids, so what do you say to your kids about police officers and law enforcement?
At this point, my kids are gonna call their father or their uncles or whoever they have to, because cops are bad, so. Yeah.
Wow, you feel that.
Yes.
You deeply feel that. Wow.
Yeah, and no such thing as a bad apple.
Wow, okay.
At all. The tree is rotten.
Yep.
Back to Ruben's question. I reject the premise that fear is the undergirding type of emotion that cops have when they go into black communities. That's why they can't police us correctly. I mean, look at her case. Was that cop fearful of her? No, he wasn't. He threw her down like he was a cattle rancher and she was a cow. He wasn't afraid of her. That was something far much more insidious than fear. That was like hatred.
It was hate.
It was hatred. But this is why I think it's a mischaracterization that fear is the reason why we can't get the policing that we deserve. Because you always see in these cases, and I just left it was a trial for a police officer in Dallas. He shot a man twice in the back for sitting in his own truck. Right? First thing he said was, I thought he was a burglar. Then it turned into something else. I was afraid for my life. That's a company line that's used to get officers off from criminal liability. It's company policy. So when we spin this narrative, and I think black folks spin it too, that we kind of let police officers off the line and say, oh, they're just afraid of us. Nah, they hate us. Let's leave it at that. They hate us. Some officers they're even disgusted by us. And when we let them off by this whole fear standard, that means they keep on getting off when they get in front of 12 people in a jury box. That fear standard needs to be changed. We need to stop spinning that narrative because that's killing us.
But don't you believe that there are a lot of good officers out there as well? Police officers.
Define a good officer.
Okay.
Good officers,
And
we get terminated when we speak out. There are good officers, but we get terminated when we speak out. I'm a former officer that was terminated. That's why I'm here, because I was one of them at Miami-Dade Police Department that spoke out. And I was terminated on June 21st because I have filed several complaints against racism within the department.
Let's talk after.
So we're gonna come back here. We're gonna come back here, and thank you, sister, for speaking up. And I'm glad that you are here to share your story. No, go ahead, Philip.
I don't want us to devolve the conversation. There are good people. We don't need to talk about whether they're good or bad. We're talking about what she already said. It's rotten to the root, right? I don't care if I'm riding a bus and my bus is late every day. I don't care if the bus driver's polite. The entire system is messed up. I want my bus when I'm supposed to get the bus. So I don't care if you're nice and polite. We're talking about an entire system that enforces laws at their discretion, that were many of the laws written to police black people, to police poor people, to police Latino people and women, right? They were already written in black and white to do that. So when they say we're just following the law, that's true. The law is messed up. And then at their discretion, as been described, they come into the neighborhood primed and ready to go, right? And so it doesn't matter. The system will purge anything that tries to fix it. Period. Or it will subsume it. So what do I mean? This woman cannot be a police officer, or when I'm out on the road with you black police officer, you better treat that boy just like he's supposed to be treated. Because the minute you don't, I'm going to tell everybody you showing favoritism to your boys, right? And so we have to talk about it in systemic things. If we get into a thing where we say, these are two good people, we can agree, they are great people, but they are a part of a system, right? And they've been elected to be up here because they are such good people, let's be clear, right? But they are a part of a system that is rotten to the core, and we need to talk about institutional change to how we envision policing. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And police does not equal safety. We need to talk about what does safety look like. It looks like good jobs, quality education, great homes, good schools, right? It looks like fathers being able to be in the home and not being kicked out because they can't get their public assistance. That's what we're talking about, what safety is. And then when we come together and we say this is what a safe community and happy community looks like, then we say, all right, what is the role for some sort of enforcement of our common values in this safe? You know what I'm saying? And
no,
we're
I
talking
understand
about,
what you're saying.
I know this sounds really big, but all we're doing is cosmetic changes to something that is deep.
Absolutely, which is why we're having this conversation, and hopefully change can come out of that. What did you think? What did you think? And what did you think when you saw the police officers in Brooklyn, New York, and they were just getting water doused on them after they went there to a call? And they didn't do anything. And eventually, those that did so got arrested. But to see that, did you at all feel any apathy towards them?
I'm an empathetic person. I don't like it when I see bad things happen to people. I don't think by virtue of me speaking up is because I do care about people, right? So no, you don't like to see, but water.
I heard a but. I heard a but.
What I'm saying is, we're talking. We can't take it out of context. Right? One video out of context is not fair. We're talking, we don't know what happened before that. We don't know what's going to happen after that, right? I've seen videos every week of a dancing cop, a rapping cop, a caring cop, the basketball playing cop, you know? And I believe those videos to be true, and that person in that video to have good aspirational things about why they joined the police force. But that does not negate the fact that we are up against a force that is over 200 years old, and that unless we acknowledge that, then everything we do is going to be short of what we want.
And that's very fair, Rodney.
And just like Phil said, I mean, a part of what I have to do on a day-to-day basis is really helping community members understand where to channel their anger. Oftentimes, we look at the police chiefs of these departments and we say, oh, it's all the police chief's fault. And I can tell you, I've talked to many of chiefs, and they say, hey, I wish I could let go of this guy as well, but I can't because of disciplinary reasons of 112, or because of the unions, or because of collective bargaining, or as you put it, both of us being legal scholars, there is an issue when state attorneys don't want to try cases for first impression to negate the reasonable fear standard. So when individuals aren't utilizing the mechanisms and channeling their anger into these silos, instead of saying it's all the police officer's fault all the time, we have to look at our legislation in Tallahassee, we have to look at collective bargaining on the local level, we have to look at unions, and most definitely we need to utilize civilian oversight in order to have our voices heard when the court system and our politicians have failed us.
Well, let's talk about that. We have a union president here right now. So let's talk about that in here. And this is a question that I have for you here, President Bell. Now, after the rough arrest of teenager DeLuca Roll went viral back in April now, and that video, I believe we may have that video if you're not familiar with DeLuca Roll. So this, you said in the Miami Herald, quote, they did exactly what we're now being told to do. So I have to support the deputies because they're following their training, end quote. Then in July, you doubled down after Sheriff Tony suspended the 3 deputies involved with outpay, saying that the Sun said, no, quote, ultimately, they'll get found not guilty, they'll win, and they'll get back pay. Do you still stick by those comments and believe those deputies didn't do anything wrong?
1,000%, I still stand behind what I said on both dates, and I'll tell you this, and I agree with the audience member on there. When you speak up, you're going against a machine on that. Unions always get the bad rap of protecting people. But let me tell you this, that the union is also an advocate for the citizens against the police department, because I went on the record out there and I exposed what was going on in our training division when we had deputies suffering injuries such as a brain bleed from the headshots that we were taking by our own instructors and our own fellow deputies during training, something that should never happen. We should never be practicing punching people in the head. And then we're put out onto the street, and what you see in the video, the optic in the 7-second video, looks bad. But when our own department is training us to do that, what did our department do against the police union that spoke out against those aggressive tactics? They created a pseudo investigation against myself, where they brought me down to the public safety building. They wanted to violate the Officer Bill of Rights, which I know you're talking about, but the Officer Bill of Rights is not some big bad bully.
It is when it's weaponized.
No, because you're wrong on that, because Chapter 112 protects a due process.
Well, the due process is only protected after the officer subject has had all the witness statements and able to read all of the information ahead of time in order to cater his statements in a way that will make it less advantageous for the witness victim to have due process.
But so you can't go backwards on the other way too, though. But to create an investigation based around a false narrative is what the agency tried to do to me. And then they put out a press release on the sheriff.org website. They put out a press release with an audio recording against me, which showed that they had no idea even what Chapter 112 was. Because it's the lack of qualifications.
If that's due process, then
it's the
every
lack of
citizen should get the police officer
qualifications that we have. Listen, I'll be the first one. I know Philip and I disagreed about a year ago in terms of candidates for who should be the governor. And I'll be the first one to say that I still support the governor to this day for removing Scott Israel. But boy, did he put an unqualified person at the leadership there that is running amok. And I'd have to say, if you're going to encourage training like that, if you're going to encourage training where we have live rounds of ammunition potentially being fired towards people in training exercises, we are way off course and we're running rogue on that.
So whose fault is it that this teenager got his head slammed into the pavement?
It is the policies and the trainings put forth. But you're going to see, it's still an active investigation, so I can't delve into too much that's on there. Okay? It's against the law for me to disclose information about the investigation itself. So I don't want to commit a law violation myself on that. But you will see in the near-term future a lot of evidence that comes out that's going to change your opinion about what happened that day.
The state of Florida has one of the robust police officers' Bill of Rights in the entire country. And the reason why it's so weaponized is because that officers get more due process rights than the normal citizen, strictly for doing their job.
But we also face twice the amount of punishment, because if somebody in the audience, for example, is working at Home Depot today and there's a complaint against them.
As you should.
Or say even if they get arrested, we'll spin it. Say they get arrested tonight for DUI. They go back to work tomorrow. If it's a police officer that gets arrested or accused of a crime, they're suspended, sometimes without pay.
As you should, because you have a lethal force.
Then if they are found not guilty by a jury, if they are found not guilty and exonerated of all criminal activity, then they still face an additional layer of punishment where the department can still terminate them based on what the criminal justice system couldn't even prove.
But I know I'll just say this.
Please.
Go ahead, Jesse. Should you not have a more weightier response to your decisions because you get actually more due process than an average citizen would? So why would you want the same type of response or same type of negative decision that a citizen wouldn't get? I mean, you get the opportunity to look at body cam evidence.
Yep.
I mean, I just left the trial, and this is how the trial basically turned. The officer said one thing out in the field. I didn't see a gun, but I didn't look. Then he got the opportunity to view the body cam evidence with his attorney. And my victim, Lindo Jones, they were illegally investigating him while he was chained to a bed full of bullet holes. And I couldn't even talk to him. And they're investigating him. But this officer had the opportunity to sit down with his attorney, with the investigator not in the room. There was no video recording them sitting down talking, and they were crafting a narrative. And that narrative essentially got him off.
If the normal citizen were to use a disproportionate use of lethal force against another citizen, the worst thing that would probably happen to them in the state of Florida, if they got convicted, is probably life in prison. For a police officer, the result, in your words alone, is termination of your job. That's it. And so that's the difference of weight there, that, okay, police officers are very scared because you may lose your job at the end of the day, as you should, because you have lethal force on your hip at the age of 18. And in the contrast of, in the city of Miami, it varies. But for most of these people, when you make this analogy, what about the guy at Home Depot? When you mess up at your job, what happens to you? We should get these rights. No, you shouldn't, because we're not using lethal force every day. And we don't, most of the day, are unsupervised with lethal force on our hips, patrolling around the neighborhood. There should be a higher standard and higher consequences because of the privilege of being a law enforcement officer and using lethal force. Simple as that.
And also, let's be clear that if any of the people in here work at Home Depot and mess up and is late, they done. They done. You know, it's not. It's
not like a whole process. Administrative leave, and I get paid while on leave, and everything else.
Even just to interrogate the analogy, the people in this room, should they run afoul of their boss at any given time, are terminated. Absolutely. So there's not actually a difference between professions. You are expressing a set of conditions where if you mess up, you lose your job. We know that life every single day.
And you talk about training. You talk about training, but I mean, it just amazes me because there needs to be training done then everywhere across the country then, and the right way. Because when I look at Dyma Loving's case, for instance, Dyma was explaining what happened to her. So Dyma was upset because a gun had just been pointed at her. And we as a people, we tend to raise our voices when we're upset. That's exactly what she did. And sure enough,
including on this panel.
And yes, right?
Anyone will raise their voice.
And that's exactly what she did. Dyma was, and he told her to lower her voice, and she did. And then as soon as she kind of raised it maybe a little bit, all of a sudden, that's it. And it just got out of hand.
Oh, he became
oh my goodness. So my thing is, when you're looking at the training, so you're telling me that training needs to be done right across the country then? I mean, as well as BSO, Broward? I mean, because again, slamming someone's head into the ground, I just don't see that as being part of the training.
Well, it's not. The photographs that you see on there, what appears to be blood, there's no blood. It's pepper spray. I'll tell you that right now. I'll resolve that right now. It's pepper spray.
Well, okay, so I did the, hold on just a minute. Hold on. That was very brave for you to come in here and say that was pepper spray. First of all.
You want the truth.
But Deputy, hold on just a minute. Hold on. I did the story, and I spoke with his mother, heartbroken mother, and I saw his nose broken, fractured, and so So you're telling me all that wasn't blood at all? That wasn't a bloody nose or anything?
You do realize that is our policy, that when there's force used, that photographs are taken. That's mandatory medical clearance as well. So there will be a second set of photographs and a second set of medical records that we cannot touch.
I understand that, but as you heard from someone in the audience there, if you're looking at the video.
Did you just not say that you couldn't talk about the investigation?
So I didn't say anything specific about it. I just said that there'd be a second.
So that's an exculpatory piece of evidence.
That is an obvious look at that.
I'm just saying. I mean,
because it's not like what Channel 7 did the other day when they showed DeLuca Roll, but then they gave the misperception that DeLuca Roll had a cut eyebrow when they showed the other juvenile from Ely High School when he was taken down by.
Well, that's why you got to watch Channel 6.
So that's why. Absolutely. So what the media sometimes wants to portray, and thank goodness we have honest news stations like this, but sometimes the sensational media wants to sell a story. They don't want to tell the truth.
So you're speaking from the photos that have been released through the media, or the photos that you've seen through the investigation?
I haven't seen any photos in the investigation. I'm only speaking from the media.
So how have you determined that was blood or pepper spray then?
Because it's orange in color.
Oh, no, man.
It's orange in color. It's dyed that way.
It was
it's
video.
Obvious.
Well, I don't know about obvious because I saw the video clips that I saw. I don't know about obvious.
Pepper spray is orange.
Okay. Well, we'll see how this thing plays out in the court of law. So I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that. All right. I'm sorry, Rodney. Did you want to ask?
The only thing I was going to say is that typically, and obviously maybe it works different in BSO, if the individual that's being arrested doesn't complain of medical injuries when they're at least in the police car or when they get to the jail or wherever, they don't necessarily get taken to a hospital or pictures are taken. They have to manifest that nature without even observation that they are injured in order for police officers to do a use of force report or to go to the police. So if that individual that is being harmed by the police doesn't go and say, hey, I'm like, my head hurts or my nose feels broken, pictures may not be taken. And so because of that, it is a policy failure on so many levels. There needs to be a police officer trained to say, hey, if this individual or kid or whoever I'm arresting seems to not be okay, I need to immediately take them to the hospital and take pictures not only for the protection of this victim, but myself as well. And a lot of times police officers, instead of writing out the reports and doing use of force and reporting it as they see fit, they don't do it because they're afraid of whatever. And it really puts a bad stain and tarnishing nature on the police department in general.
Okay, Delrish Moss, this next question is for you. In 2016, you did become the chief of police in Ferguson, Missouri, becoming the first black chief of police there for a city that will be well remembered for Michael Brown. So why is there still a disconnect in 2019 between some in local law enforcement and the black community?
One of the reasons there's still a disconnect is because, can you not hear me?
Yeah, there you go. Raise your mic a little bit.
Okay. Lift it up here.
So why is there still a disconnect in 2019 between some in local and law enforcement and the black community?
One of the reasons there's still a disconnect between law enforcement, local law enforcement there in the community is because a lot of the reform things that have happened in Ferguson they take time. You still have people who have not even had, really haven't had contact with the police, but when you look at the historic nature of the relationship that's been there, it was 100 years of building that relationship, 2.5 years of changing it. Ferguson, I had some advantages as chief. I didn't have a law enforcement bill of rights in Missouri, and I didn't have a union. So it was very easy for me as a police chief to say, you know what, you're not working out. So that was one of the things that happened. And in Ferguson, that happened. As a matter of fact, if you look at Ferguson today, over 75% of the police department that's there today didn't exist there before 2014. Prior to 2014, the average tenure of a police officer on the Ferguson Police Department was 25 years. The command staff, 43 years. Most of the guys there, most of the police department that exists there today are people that I hired. And one of the things that when you started looking at hiring, one of the things that we did was we started changing the way we hired. Just in terms of even the questions that we gave. Typically when you go on a job interview, they ask you the question, why do you want to be a police officer? Why do you want this job? That kind of thing. Well, we started asking questions about when's the last time you did something for a person and you didn't expect anything in return. We started looking for people who were committed to service. I hired one officer who had been in police work, but he left police work after having an autistic son and decided to go and work in that environment so he could better serve his son. He wanted to come back into police work now, and he was a welcome opportunity. I had some advantages in Ferguson. I had a smaller police department, so I also got a chance to not only have the community interview them and have the police department interview them and this whole swath of interviews, but I also got a chance to sit down with every officer that I hired one-on-one. So I had some advantages that most police chiefs don't have, especially in larger
But how
police
does that play in
departments.
the disconnect, though,
Now,
still today?
That speaks to the disconnect because the disconnect had long been there. But if you go to Ferguson today, I'm telling you that there's a much better relationship and building than there ever was. No magic wand, couldn't do it overnight, but certainly made great progress.
Yes.
And I think a lot of that had to do with that they had the right police chief there as well. I think if someone else were to go there, they may not see the same inroads. But where Ferguson was, it was pretty low at an F. And even though I'm sure Ferguson is leaps and bounds better than it was. They had a consent decree. It had Natasha Tidwell and her team there really doing great, phenomenal work on the ground level. But there's a lot of police departments that an improvement is from an F to a D, and you're still failing because the standard is so high when you're a police officer. And I think the disconnect comes with a lot of organizations is not only with the hiring process, but the promotion process. I mean, one of the most profound things a police officer ever said to me is that, hey, Rodney, sometimes it's better to be blue than black or white. And that us versus them mentality, that cultural understanding that breeds implicit bias really seeps through in communities where people are patrolling. And until those things are at least recognized in a way that can either be trained out of an individual or that you're selecting an individual that doesn't have those inherent biases, that disconnect will always remain there.
Justin.
I mean, I'm a policy wonk, so I always relate it back to policy. And I think the 94 crime bill, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, it set the basis for policing in this country. I mean, when it comes to federal grants going to police departments for the number of arrests, or if it goes to prisons for the number of people in a prison, it gives them the incentive to arrest at a high rate. But they're not going to go into communities that have affluence and a lot of material wealth to arrest those folks. They're going to go to the doldrums of society. And who is that for all intents and purposes? It's us, right? I mean, there's a lot of affluent blacks in here, a lot of middle class folks, but I guarantee you the city of Miami or the county of Miami-Dade, the poor folks are pretty much people of color. So, I mean, if these departments are being activated in such a way to get this grant money, and if anybody that knows anything about a nonprofit or, Dr. Hardrick, I know you like getting federal grant money for this school. It's important for the day-to-day functions of having that operational income. You're going to try and find a way to increase your numbers. It comes down to public policy and budgets. I mean, I heard something the other day and it blew my mind. A budget is a moral document.
Yeah.
And I don't think police departments are using their budgets in a very moral way. It's just get as much money as possible, and damn knows who we arrest, because we're just trying to get these dollars and we're trying to beef up our police departments. So I think it comes down to, the 2020 election is going to be important. I'm not going to sit here and just sound like a broken record on that either, but we really need to talk about stripping down that 94 crime bill, finding those areas that really affect our communities, because that's federal. And we like to say there's states' rights, and there's a Chinese wall between federal decisions and state decisions. But that bill right there is the reason why we're going to keep on getting policed like we are year after year. So we can talk about training officers, getting folks who have some sense of being a good Samaritan. I mean, but it's not going to change if the policy is arrest as many people as possible, and damn knows who we arrest.
And once you get the equipment, you must use it. Right? So once I've gotten military-grade weaponry donated or given to my police department, it must be used. Right. And so if I've come up to a time where I haven't used the battering ram or I haven't used the SWAT equipment, we've got to find a way to use it. And so they're going to use it, and it's going to be on maybe, it's usually something that is trumped up. And I think one other thing while we're on the
just ironically, I'm sorry, the parallels there.
It just comes out of me. Right, yeah. But also to that point, I'm a native of Chicago, and I think once you really start to look at this, and this isn't all police departments, but every weekend you all are reading an article about the crime in Chicago, and the crime in Chicago has a lot of different causes. But I would caution all of us who are consumers of narrative, consumers of media, to beware when you read a bunch of articles about a city being war-torn, right? A city being infested with crime. A part of town being infested with crime. I ask that you all interrogate that. One, if there are legitimate indiscretions happening, what are the root causes of those? And I've tried to lay out some of those. But also, is that much crime really going on? Because who does that really benefit when your neighborhood gets labeled a crime-ridden neighborhood? Where does that money go? It's not going to Tokosi Center, right? No. It's not going to the African American Heritage. It's not going to it's going to the police department. And so I'm talking about Chicago. I can't speak about about Miami and Miami-Dade. But you gotta wonder during a 4th of July weekend who's doing all that shooting. Right. Yeah. Right. You gotta wonder about when those articles are coming out, who is that really benefiting? What is that story benefiting? So while we're on the story and while we've got a captive audience here and abroad, I want you all to really think about when you hear something about Liberty City, when you hear something about Overtown. And I'm not saying that there are not things happening, that lives are not being lost, but I'm saying we need to interrogate our stories, and when that money starts to move based on said crime, where does it go?
They got PR departments for a reason, man.
All right. All right, let's move on now. And this is to our CIP Assistant Director, Rodney Jacobs here. Will you confront and look at abusive police practices and also hold police accountable for their responsibilities? So how often do allegations involve people of color? And from what you've seen, does race usually play a factor?
So in our office, we see a disproportionately amount of our complaints come from black and brown people. I think the percentage of black people in the city of Miami is somewhere between 12 to 14% at the last census. We had over 50% of our complaints come from people of color in our office. So there are a lot of people that are engaged with our process that are black, brown, Latino. And I think in some ways it's a conundrum because honestly, if you have more police officers patrolling in black neighborhoods, more often than not, you're going to have more black interactions with police officers, thereby more areas of misconduct. I'd imagine that if police officers were patrolling at a nice university in our area at the same amount they were patrolling over town of Liberty City, they would find just as much drug possession there as well. The fact of the matter is they're not patrolling as much there, so they don't have as much interaction for that. I think a lot of what we find in our office is that there's still another 50% of people that are being subject to police misconduct. And although the headline story is the disproportionate amount of people that are affected, there's still another 50% of outside residents, white Americans, white Cubans, or whomever that are being mistreated by police officers. And I think once we wrap our heads around that, we can really start peeling back the layers of departmental policy issues and issues with just individual police officers. One of the things that we're constantly talking about in our office, and it goes back to what you said about budgets as well, is that police officers get an absorbent amount of money to run their departments, but yet when an individual police officer somehow gets into discipline with the city attorney, there's a settlement, and that settlement money doesn't come out of the police department budget. It comes out of the taxes that people pay to the city to run the city. So if you have individual police officers that never really feel the tickle or the pain of their infractions, they're not more than likely going to change their operation. So it comes back to that compounded by where we put our resources. And the last piece, and I think this is one of the most important pieces that we don't say enough, is that we have to be collaborative in how we figure out these issues. I think there's a lot of people saying, hey, this is just a black issue, or this is just a white issue, or police are bad, or police are good, whatever it is that at the end of the day, black people at one time or another has called the police officers for help. Obviously, we need them in order to solve some of those problems. And police officers need community members as well, because last time I checked, no one, in their sound mind, commits crimes in front of police officers, right? But if individuals within these communities want to come forward about being witnesses, they have to have trust in their police department in order to do so. And without that trust, no one comes to solve crimes. And if police officers aren't solving those crimes because community members don't trust them, the whole collaboration falls apart. So we have to do all three of those in order to be effective.
Amen. And Trina, we're going to check back in with Trina. Trina has another audience question. Make sure her mic is up.
Thank you, Jawan. And I think everything comes down to respect, and it seems like there's a loss of respect on both sides.
Okay.
So that's something that's going to have to be repaired. Right now, I'm going to bring up Mr. Rene Martinez. He's a former gang leader and turned street minister and really is doing incredible work in our community. Rene.
How y'all doing? Praise God.
Amen.
A lot of people got their own opinions, but the Word of God says, lean not on your own understanding. So I feel like, everybody forgot about God. Everybody don't forgot about Jesus Christ, and there's so much hate going on, all this racism, and it's been going on since back in the days. And that's the solution to the problem right there, Jesus Christ. And that's real from experience. I had nothing but hate in my heart my whole life. I'm a brand new man now. I got Christ in me. So
Amen.
My question is,
preach.
Praise God. What measures can be taken to educate the public to recognize racial profiling?
Oh, wow. Who would like to take that? Don't you all jump at once.
Racial profiling is an interesting concept because I think in some ways it's exacerbated by what we create to be our laws. I'm always saying that, you know, people don't commit crimes, they commit acts, and we criminalize those acts depending upon who's writing the narrative or who understands or who's in power to do it. And so if we utilize our lawmaking abilities in a way that disincentivize some of the atrocities in our culture, we would have a better citizenry because of it. We would have more civility, not only in our law enforcement, but in our politics as well. And I hate to be a policy nut because I don't think policy is necessarily the best way to do everything, or that law is the best way to do everything. But if we're going to live in a society where we're just looking at our actions and then we're making policies from that, that would be a good place to start.
Anyone else want to add to that?
I think you said it great.
All right. Then, Trina, we're going to go ahead and go to our next audience member question.
Well, we just had those awful events in Dayton and El Paso, but so many of us in this room can relate to what happened here in Parkland. I live in Parkland. I've been there 12 years. The day that the shooting happened at Marjory Stoneman Douglas, I just been in that school the week before. My neighbors called me crying, saying that their kids were in that school and they thought they were dying. And what could we do, and how fast could I get on the air, and how fast could I find out what was going on? It's one thing being in a studio, going on air, telling what's happening. It's different when you were there. Mei Ling was there. Mei Ling Ho Xing is a recent high school grad from Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, and on that day, when 17 people were killed, when a heinous, demonistic man went into that school and shot it up, and there had been plenty of warnings to the police departments. They had been to his home 28, 32 times, whatever the number was, but he was allowed to go in that school and kill children and people who had really given to this community. She was there that day, and she wants to talk to you tonight. Mei Ling.
Mei Ling.
I'll first like to say that video of Luca, I received it from so many times from friends, family all around Broward County from their direct phone to tell me, Mei Ling, use your platform. So the fact that you think that it wasn't blood breaks my heart. So when we talk about police officers, arming teachers, more security personnel, I tend to talk about my experience inside of the 1200 building on the second floor. My PTSD did not come from Nicholas Cruz. A lot of it did not come from him, but it came from the security, the SWAT, that busted through the door and had my class at gunpoint. We were later on evacuated. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen videos of what happened inside that building. I don't know the privilege of reaching into my back pocket and taking out a phone to record when being escorted by an officer. And that's just the fact. 2 weeks after, we came back to school, and Parkland thought it was safety to have over 100 police officers greet us at our red gates. We had officers roaming our hallways in bulletproof vests with the same gun that killed 17 of our classmates and staff, and 17 other more. Sorry, I'm so emotional.
It's okay, take your time.
So when we talk about arming teachers, we talk about police and my feelings towards them, and bringing them into school. We talk about a healthy working environment. I did not feel safe. It was not a healthy working environment when I was greeted at my door with the same gun that slaughtered the person that sat next to me. So I ask you, do you think that having heavily armed officers, more security, arming teachers, do you think that creates a healthy studying environment for students of color?
A culmination of all that, when you have the optics of a heavily armed officer walking around, no, it's not a healthy environment on that. I think if you take a mixture of everything that you said and combine it together where you may have plainclothes security with weapons that are concealed instead of the uniform presence there, in addition to the school resource deputy. If you actually get on top of the school board, where the school board was urged and recommended to put metal detectors to make entry with weapons a lot more difficult, and our school board over a year ago said we need to have more conversations about putting metal detectors in our schools to make them safer. But you know what? They haven't even had a single conversation in the past year, and they're dropping the ball on that. So I think there has to be a mixture. And when you talk about arming teachers on that, that's not a one-size-fits-all solution. In a rural community where weapons are more accessible to people and more people carry them in their community because they go hunting or sport gaming, a different sense of responsibility with weapons and the safety aspect with that. Is it going to work down here in South Florida? No. It's a recipe for disaster on that because we have too many fights inside the school and it's just arming somebody else. Officers walking around with rifles, no, that shouldn't happen. We fought against that because we don't have the ability to defend ourselves if we need to take action when we're by ourselves carrying a rifle. What do you do with the rifle if you have to get in a fight with somebody? And we complained to our previous administration, not the current one, about that, and they didn't care because it was all about our previous sheriff touting of what an amazing leader he was, which we all know that he was not. Okay, and that's why we need to get to the root of it. It's a culmination of everything that we need to make the schools safer. Our building plans haven't changed. They use the same blueprints for every single school because it's the same two companies that build all the campuses. We need to put layers, what we call onion layers of security at the school. Gates are closed, somebody's at the door. When an alarm goes off, it's not an audible alarm. Simple little things that can lock people inside the classrooms can make it safer. But I apologize if you felt that you were threatened when you see the SWAT teams come through, but we've learned through past experience that when we have situations like that, when we think there may be one or two individuals, and that's the intelligence that we're given, and then we get those two individuals, all too often there happens to be a third and a fourth and a fifth. They're just waiting and hiding for us to drop our guard. So that's why we have to take people out like that. It's for our safety as well as everybody else's on that. It does look bad, but it's for everybody's safety on that.
I think the issue here is not necessarily with police officers. Let's be honest. One death is too many, and I don't care how many armed police officers you put on soft targets, they're not necessarily going to stop maybe the first student from getting shot. By trying to solve this issue with police departments, you're really solving the remnants of the root issue, which is gun violence in America. And until individuals in our government, as well as other places, really put that at their focal point to solving gun violence, doesn't matter how many security officers you put there, it doesn't matter who you arm, you're just making it a bad environment to do what school is meant for.
No, I'll just add on that too. With Nicholas Cruz, he should have never been able to get to that point. Okay, he should have never been able to purchase a weapon legally. Never should that have happened. But our previous administration, and I've said this many of times, no police officer wants to load up the jails with juveniles. No. But there has to be consequences for some of their actions on that. But when you create programs such as the Promise program, where a police officer may witness a criminal violation in front of them, but they get up to 4 criminal violations per school year on school campus, and we're not allowed to arrest them because the school board is going to dictate which laws we get to enforce. We're paid to enforce the laws. And then under our previous administration, they came up with the civil citation program, which then gave that same person who reached that 4 level inside the schools, they gave them another 4 chances out on the street before we could finally do something. So if we had the ability to actually arrest Nicholas Cruz, we could have put a criminal record on his past there, which would have prevented him from purchasing a gun in the first place. Now, there were more problems with him. The mental health, they put him in an alternative school, but to make it look good, they put him back in Parkland.
Well, Justin's
should have never been there.
Justin's itching here to say something about Justin. He's chopping. Go ahead.
I'm just amazed that you just attacked diversion programs based on a monster. I mean, how do you just attack giving students of color the ability to not go into the prison system? We have a very active school to prison pipeline. I'm not from the area, but I presume the Promise program is to ensure that students aren't being ushered into prison. So we can't use the misdeeds of a monster to totally condemn a mechanism to make sure we, disaffect and disembowel the school to prison pipeline. I think that's dangerous talk. That's dangerous rhetoric.
No, well, if you listen to what I said when I opened up, it is not the goal of a police officer to fill the jails with juveniles. That is not the goal. But there has to be some type of consequence. That doesn't mean just jail. That does not mean just jail.
You completely negated
that. That's why I opened it up on that. But there has to be some type of a consequence to that. We're in favor of the Promise program, and I've been on record saying that. We're in favor of it. But you have to give the individual officer on scene the ability to make or not make an arrest based on the totality of the circumstances, the familiarity with the student himself, and past incidents. I mean, what else? We have family members that come to us, they beg for help because they can't control their child. So they go to the school, they beg for help, and they go out unanswered because there's no resources for them. Now with Cruz and everybody else, you get Baker acted, okay, now you're voluntarily to go get services. Right. If you get arrested, not for the purpose of seeking jail time, but now it's court-ordered mental health, and they have to get that health.
And this is my last point. So are you willing to say here on the stage that Nicholas Cruz is a product of the Promise program?
He's a product of the environment that we created to allow somebody like Nicholas Cruz to fall through the cracks and ultimately become the monster that he was.
So the Promise program aided in him.
It was one of the pieces of the puzzle. It's not the piece of the puzzle.
Well, that's definitely a point that can be debated. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we are at the end of our town hall program. And first and foremost, we want to thank everyone out there who could not make it here, who decided to tune in on the NBC6 app, also NBC6.com. Remember, education is the key to success. That's what we are learning here. If you believe, you will succeed. Our audience members, please give Diamond Loving a round of applause. Justin Moore, Philip Agnew, Deputy Bell, come on. He came here, he didn't have to come here. Delrish Moss and Rodney Jenkins. Thank you so much for coming out. Remember, this will be on the podcast. If you missed it, you can tune into our podcast on NBC6 Voices, NABJ. Thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, be sure to have a safe night tonight.
Good job, man.
Wow.
Sunday?
You got hard, man.
Good job.
Yeah, you told us all the time.